give it solid.
Okay, thank you for everyone here from the community and from the police violence and social control class. It's so great to be speaking out about issues of police violence against the LGBTQ community. And I think I just want to give my speakers and John a double round of appreciation. Alma Rosa Silva-Bañuelos and Renae Swope from UNM's LGBTQ Resource Center. And because coming out as lesbian, gay, transgender, that's a coming out and that's its own process, and it takes a lot of courage. Coming out about police violence is also kind of coming out. So thank you very much for talking about the intersections of these really important issues. And I'll like to just briefly introduce Alma, and Alma will introduce Renae. So Alma Rosa Silva-Bañuelos is currently the LGBTQ Resource Center at the University of Mexico and was instrumental in its founding the center in 2010. In this role, Alma Rosa is committed to creating a space that provides service to UNM students, faculty, and staff of all gender identities and sexual orientations through support, advocacy, education, and safety. She has also been a community organizer in her hometown of Albuquerque, New Mexico since the late 90s and has worked throughout New Mexico facilitating local and rural communities to self-organize for social justice. She has worked with many local, statewide, regional, national, binational nonprofits, and currently is part of a member of the board of directors for the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico and Equality New Mexico. She is also a co-founding member of Young Women United, a local grassroots nonprofit organization founded in 1999, working on lots of issues, including reproductive justice. Alma Rosa continues to organize and advocate for social justice while working towards LGBTQ recognition, acceptance, equal rights, and liberation.
Thank you, and let's give it up for Darcy Brazen for coordinating this. Before I introduce my co-presenter, I want to acknowledge some of the elders in the room. And if you all will, put your hands together for Amalia. One of our elders that's been on the front lines with the Occupy movement here in Albuquerque, so thank you for that and your continued work. When some of us can't be in the streets, Amalia's there. And I also want to acknowledge and honor our elder, Sally Alice Thompson, that's here. Sally Alice just received the Si Se Puede Dolores Huerta Award at the Recuerda Cesar Chavez event, and that's a Lifetime Achievement Award, so it's an honor to have her here. And she's also one of the founders of the Center for Peace and Justice Center here in Albuquerque, which is a hub for us and an organizing center that a lot of our local community uses to organize against police brutality. So thank you for that, Sally Alice. And so I do want to introduce my co-presenter, Renae Swope, Navajo Dene. She is our trans inclusion specialist at the LGBTQ Resource Center, and she is our program coordinator for the UNM Gallup LGBTQ Resource Center. And with that, I'll let Renae introduce herself a little bit more.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renae Swope, and Czechia Anislant Askeri Bashichin, Big Between the Chiche, Daishin National, but Astan and Shlen. Hello, everyone. I just introduced myself in Navajo. My name is Renae Swope again, and my clans are Kia'ani, which is towering house born for sagebrush. My maternal grandparents are the deer at the water people, I think, and Deishini. I don't know what Deishini means, I'm sorry.
In English.
That's me as a woman in Navajo.
Great. Okay, so we are ready to start this presentation, I think. Okay, we're on.
Mic check.
Oh yeah, is Renae's mic on?
No.
Just hit the on button, there we go. share. Maybe we can get tech in the house to get that on. So I'm gonna stand. It's a little hard for me to do these presentations sitting down. We've developed a Prezi for you, and I just wanna be clear, our title today is Police Brutality in the LGBTQ Community. So we are gonna take a little bit of a historical walk together on police brutality that's affected our community and has been perpetuated on the LGBTQ community. At the end, we can talk about being two-spirit and what that means, but I just want to be clear that's not a focus of today's presentation, even though that's in our paper flyers. Oh, yay. So here we are, myself and Renae. And we're going to talk a little bit about the laws against LGBTQ people, and we're going to take you back historically to share some of those laws. So blue laws, and this is something that came out, and it was called Sunday laws. So this is part of the US legal system since our colonial period. These Sunday laws, or they were known as Sunday laws or Sunday closing laws, originally intended as laws against moral offenses, and then you start to see a shift towards the LGBTQ community. I'm trying to get, let's see if this Prezi will do this. Do we know how to, I need the computer to expand the image with this little thing? No? Okay. So the Sunday laws really break down, that's when alcohol sales stopped happening on Sundays. This is when we stopped working on Sundays. So you see these moral offenses, and then you can start to see how they shift towards the LGBTQ community.
Okay, here is the sodomy laws and how it first came to be. Sodomy is a reference to the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And furthermore, it's in 1962, gay sex between two consenting adults was a felony in every state of the United States. And I think currently, as it is, there are 12 states in the United States that still go by this sodomy law. I think mostly southern states. That's briefly what I've read so far. Sodomy laws typically carry lengthy prison sentences, fines, and even hard labor. Some statutes were written broadly enough to cover any form of non-vaginal intercourse within like heterosexual relationships, so that's anal sex and oral sex and whatnot.
Go ahead and I can take the next.
All right, 1960s police brutality. Civil unrest in the United States is rampant. Queer, trans, and gender non-conforming people are at the forefront of the LGBTQ civil disobedience. The homelessness and youth are also fighting back against police at this time. And this further goes into Stonewall riots and whatnot.
Thank you. So I want to go really quick back to those sodomy laws. You really see where heterosexual patriarchy starts to get integrated in our laws and in our judicial system. So really the homophobia that gets played out with those sodomy laws are affected on the LGBTQ community. So here we are in 1960s. So we actually don't start with the Stonewall riots. We start with the Compton cafeteria riots because this happened in 1966, and this is one of the first recorded times that we have of police brutality and police violence specifically targeted at our transgender community. At this time in 1966, transgender wasn't a term. Transvestite was the term that was used. So it was our transvestite community that was targeted and attacked. Now, the Compton cafeteria used to be a safe haven. That used to be where our trans and gender nonconforming community used to hang out because they weren't being accepted at the gay bars. So you really see our gay and lesbian community at the gay bars. And Compton cafeteria it was a 24-hour location, so our community hung out there. It was a place to call home. And this is where they started to get targeted. So this is where the police targeted trans women, and then they tried to arrest them. And so one of the trans women threw her coffee in the cop's face, and the police violence ensued. And so this is one of the first, and this is called the Compton Cafeteria Riots. So our community took the streets and our community fought back. And that was in 1966, and that was one of the first riots recorded of our LGBTQ community. But as it says, over time, that documentation has been lost, because what we hear is Stonewall, but we don't hear about Compton cafeteria riots. And to go back real quick, because we don't have a specific slide on her, but this is Felicia Flames, and she is still alive, and she's still doing the work. And she's our trans sister that was at the Compton cafeteria riots. So now we get to Stonewall. Stonewall happened in 1969, so that was 3 years after the Compton cafeteria riots. And Stonewall was a bar, the Stonewall Inn. It was a bar in New York, or it is a bar in New York, and the mafia owned this bar. So our community was frequenting this establishment, and on June 28th at 1:20 a.m., it was set to have a police raid at the Stonewall Inn, and that happened. And the police were targeting, the raid was specific to our trans and gender nonconforming community, and they went in, but our community fought back again. So we were targeted, and we refused to leave this establishment. I believe this is also the time where the laws said that you had to have 3 articles of clothing that were per your gender. And so if you didn't have 3 articles of clothing that were that correlated with your sex assignment at birth, then you were arrestable. You were breaking the law. And it was illegal to be dancing with a same-sex partner. So a lot of the times at these raids, everyone would separate once the police came in. So this particular night, our community fought back, and after that, it ensued a 3-day, what they call the Stonewall riots, 3 days, 3 nights, and the police continued to raid the Stonewall Inn, and our community refused to leave. Our community came back. We were not going to be pushed out violently from a place that we called home or that we found community. So that's what ended up happening. We had Miss Major. She was our keynote speaker at the Rainbow Graduation last year, and she was at the Stonewall riots, and she shares her story that she's a Black trans woman, and she, the cops were coming after her. She spit in a police officer's face, and he clocked her and knocked her out cold and then threw her in a paddy wagon. But then the next day they were all released and they came back. And so, like I said, the Stonewall riots ensued for 3 days and 3 nights. So now we're bringing you to some of the laws that are currently on the books. Oh, you have one.
Yes. Hello?
Yes.
All right, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, also known as PREA, was passed in 2003 but not enacted until 2012. And so really they didn't start collecting data until 2013, so it's like 2 years ago, maybe less than that. Facilities that failed to comply with PREA also lost 5% of their federal funding. Furthermore, penalties also only apply to state-run facilities. To my understanding, there are about 7 state-run facilities here in New Mexico. The rest are all owned by GEO, which is a national corporation that is capitalizing or monopolizing prison industries here in the United States. Texas, Arizona has refused to comply. New Mexico does not comply with the PREA. So that kind of gives you an idea of where New Mexico stands. Inmates are required to watch a video to prevent rape. And from personal experience, I don't know what this video is, so I've never seen it, so I don't know what it entails and how you prevent rape by watching a movie.
And so I think another aspect to take away from this is that the penalties for the facilities that don't comply with PREA are state-run facilities. Now we know what's happening with the prison industrial complex, right? So we have private corporations taking over our prison and detention centers. So as soon as it becomes private, they are now excluded from PREA law. So we see this trend of corporations that are running these facilities, and we're losing more and more protections under private facilities. So there was a survey done of our trans and gender nonconforming community in 2011. The National Gay Lesbian Task Force ran this survey, and they have since changed their name. So they are now the LGBTQ National Task Force. Now, this report, the survey was on all aspects of our community: housing, employment, treatment at work, suicide, suicidal ideation, attempts, and so forth. Our community came back and reported at such high rates at every single facet in that survey. They had no choice but to call this survey injustice at every turn. So here are a few stats. So 22% of the respondents reported harassment by police. 6% reported physical assault, 2% reported sexual assault, and 46% were uncomfortable asking for police assistance. Now, the other thing that is on the rise right now, I would say that the 2% reported sexual assault is a very low number. I think that there is some fear of retaliation to report on sexual assault by police, that's perpetuated by police or law enforcement, because this is something that is on the rise right now, is sexual assault by law enforcement on our community, and it's not being reported. So we have a couple clips that we just wanted to share with you all, and then we'll go into our interview questions and some dialogue with you all. But we wanted to show just brief clips of the kind of treatment our community faces once they do go into the prison industrial complex, and some of the facets in how they survive and keep some of their integrity and dignity as queer, trans, and gender nonconforming people.
K-11 is a term that we use for gay males in custody. That term came about to alleviate the use of derogatory terms towards gay men. If you are a gay male in Los Angeles, you're going to know certain things about that lifestyle. Do you consider yourself a fag hag?
Not a fag hag. Fag, but not a fag hag.
You know what a size queen is?
Somebody.
So we're going to stop right there. But you can see that power dynamic that the two corrections officers and that rapport that they have. And this is in the language that we just heard right now. So people aren't even being asked in a dignified way, are you gay? Or what is your sexual orientation? The language is, are you a fag, right? Are you a fag hag? So already using derogatory language to determine identity. And this is in what is supposed to be an up and coming wing for gay men in the LA County Detention Center. And so there's a lot of work that the community is doing in LA with LAPD to build visibility for the trans community and ultimately do sensitivity training and relationship building so our trans and gender nonconforming community in LA are treated better when they are met with law enforcement. Now, all the training, all of this is great, but the reality of the theory and the practice is what you saw right now. And they still use threats for our trans community once they are arrested, that they'll be thrown with the general population. So right now there's major actions happening in LA around Trans Lives Matter. They're doing direct action, they're taking the streets, they're doing die-ins in intersections, and some of our trans sisters are getting arrested. And so it's their stories that they come out saying, we're in LA, we're supposed to have a more sensitive wing, but the corrections officers and police officers automatically start using transphobic threats to our community. So we know that the police violence and police brutality really supersedes at all levels.
Also last year during the Trans Remembrance Week, we hosted, or we did a Trans Day of Visibility, or a Day of Action on November 18th, where we protested in front of the UNM library, and we demanded for change. We demanded for dignity, as well as just that trans lives matter. And that happens yearly now on November 18th, so look out for November 18th.
And we just had International Trans Visibility Day on March 31st. And history was just made. We had a delegation of trans women of color that met with the White House administration to talk about violence against our trans community. Because as of right now, we have lost 12 trans women since January 2015. So if you think about how many weeks, we're at least one a week, if not a little bit more.
Over there is more organized, more politics. You know, you do, or you get discipline. Whereas over here, it's more freedom. And you're more allowed to say what you feel, how you feel, as opposed to being in line or living in fear. You don't have to live that way anymore.
Believe it or not, some of these transgenders, these homosexuals are so creative, you know? They come in here, they get a sheet, they make it out of a beautiful dress. They get clothing, this right here, they make it out of thongs. You know what I mean? They're just so creative. Half of them come in here, they go to court, they come in with, I mean, this is where they sleep, this is where they eat.
So we just wanted to show that as a way of how our community still tries to be dignified within the system. And in this gay wing of the LA County Detention Center, you see our community has some ability to express themselves in their whole self, right? So we just wanted to share this, but it's not the Holiday Inn. And that's really how these correction officers try and portray prison, and that there is a culture and it's a pathology of us being in prison, and it is not. It really is an undignified place for us, and it's the result of extreme police brutality and historical trauma that our community has been surviving for many, many decades at this time. So with that, I'd like to introduce the personal story that Renae Swope is about to share with you. So if you all will, put your hands together and welcome Renae one more time.
"7078." That was my prison number, New Mexico Department of Corrections. This picture here was actually taken the day after I was released from prison in August of 2010. So it's 2005 now, and a lot has happened since then. Going back a few years to 2007, early 2007. But we can go further back. We can go as far back as high school, to where I started experiencing violence. But since we're particularly talking about police violence, then we can go back to about 2006, I'm guessing. So 2006, on the streets of Albuquerque, doing what I had to do to make ends meet, doing sex work, trying to find trying to make some money for my next hit or my next drink for alcohol, living on the streets, sleeping on the bus stop. Police kind of got to know me, basically, and knew my name that was given to me by my parents. And so these officers would come strolling around, driving around the park while we sleep. And Morningside Park back in the day was like a haven for us. We slept there, we slept in the playground, we dreamed of a better life, and hopefully we all got out alive. And so that was our daily struggle, is trying to make it through that day. And so we would do what we had to do to make it through that day. And so Morningside Park was like a haven here in Albuquerque. And so these officers would patrol the parks, and obviously I'm there as well as the other trans sisters of mine, and do nothing, just sit there, be quiet, and have a little drink at our side. And so these officers that knew us by name would call us, like, hey, what's going on? What are you guys doing? What guys are you guys doing now? Or they will call me, and I'm gonna kind of disclose my birth name.
You don't have to.
I don't have to, but I choose to just because it gives true value to what I've experienced. I can tell you so many stories, but I can say that my name is Renae and it's always been Renae. But for the fact that I was born as a male, and I was a sex assigned male at birth, and so my given name was Sean. And so these officers would yell out my name, Sean, what are you doing? Get over here. Why are you out on the streets again? Haven't I told you to stay off the streets? And so just this relationship these officers have built with me based on me being transgender and me being known on the streets for prostituting and whatnot. And so it was like, okay, this officer is here again, we gotta run, we gotta go hide because we knew what he was gonna do. And so jumping a little further more, 2007 of December, January. 2008 January, I was so drunk that I was going to Palomas driving. My friend was driving and didn't remember anything. I woke up in jail, and I woke up with handcuffs so tight to my back, and I was bleeding. The handcuffs were so tight on me that I was bleeding, and I tried asking the officer, what is it that I did? And he wouldn't tell me. So at that time, he was just like name calling me, faggot, you fucking queer, you fucking beat up my police officer friend, why the fuck did you do that? And so these harsh words, bashing words, kind of took me back to high school where other students just basically verbally abused us, threw rocks at us, threw food at us, and so just constant violence. So I'm used to it in a sense, but really it's like, okay, I have a hard shell now, so whatever. And so I'm sitting in a substation, vaguely wake up, and I'm like so half drunk, and I'm sitting there waiting, and this officer is sitting right in front of me, and he's telling me all of this stuff, you fucking queer, faggot, what the fuck, like just basically just bashing me. And so he pulls me up and he throws me back in the vehicle, and this is the middle of winter. I have no shoes on, and so transported to some dark street somewhere, and I'm sitting in the back of the vehicle, and he gets out of his car, and I didn't think anything of it, but he just pulls me out, yanks me out, and I'm walking through snow, and I go into another police vehicle, and there's another guy in the vehicle, and this guy starts bashing me, starts yelling at me, don't come near me, don't touch me, stay far away from me, I don't want your disease, I don't want to catch HIV, and so, I'm okay, whatever, I'm sitting there delusional, just drunk and whatnot. And this another officer gets in the vehicle, and we drive off to the jail. And so I get to the jail, and the bashing continues with the COs, horribly. Like as I went through the process, none of the male officers wanted to search me, just because they felt that it was a horrible thing, that I was a horrible person, that had some kind of disease or some sort. And so just the fact that they had to struggle between themselves to see who would strip search me. It took about maybe 15, 20 minutes just to kind of figure out who was going to do that. And so eventually it did happen. And so I'm being called by my birth name. I'm put in the jail cell, holding cell with other men. And I'm sitting there, okay, whatever, I'm just here. And then some of the inmates there, or some of the people that were in jail were sitting there and some of them are okay, some start bashing me with some more words and whatnot. And I'm just sitting there, okay, yeah, I just want to go. I just need to leave. And so eventually I get taken to the back and I'm in jail, and I stay in jail for 13 months, just waiting. Waiting to go to court, waiting and waiting and waiting. So finally, I get a letter from the public defender who said she was unable to take my case because she was too overwhelmed by other cases. And so I go through another public defender, and he's like, okay, well, this is a conflict of interest because I had a co-defendant. And so I finally get another representation, but a contracted out representation. And I meet with him for maybe 15 seconds, and that was the extent of our meeting. Next time I saw him was in court, and I stood in front of the judge for like less than 30 seconds, maybe like 20 seconds as well. And so I'm given 3 years probation. I get released the following day after 13 months of doing jail. But through the whole entire time in jail, it was a harsh environment for me because other inmates, some guys that wanted to be tough, wanted to prove their manhood, was constantly, okay, you need to step away. But it wasn't really more of the fear of inmates to me. It was more of the fear from correctional officers, because they had the power to do whatever they want just because they had a badge. That was the reality behind it in jail. So jump forward a few more months later, I get sentenced to the Department of Correction. And so that process there was horrible. It was scary, horrible, because it was my first time going to prison. And the intake took like 6 hours to do. But initially when I first got there, it was okay, you need to undress down to nothing and just stand there naked. So I'm standing there naked with a bunch of like 14 other guys. We're standing there, and so one by one, the officer pats us down, has us cough, squat and cough, all that good stuff. And so I get settled into level 3 prison in Hobbs, New Mexico, and I worked in the kitchen because in prison you have to work, you have to make your own living. I made 55 cents working in the kitchen, and good thing my mother supported me, so that was extra income. I had some other hustle things like braiding hair and ironing, and became a seamstress. But besides the fact, I worked in the kitchen. I had to work in the kitchen, so it was an everyday, Monday through Friday job. I would get patted down. But once the word got out that I had breasts, basically, officers got curious. Really curious to seeing what I looked like naked. And after that, every day after that, officers would always constantly tell me to strip down to my boxers, and that was it. So I stand there, I'm like, okay, and he, go ahead, go. That's the extent of my search. There was no patting down, there was no search for nothing. It was just more of what I had up here. And so even going further than that, I'd be walking down the hallway, going to the library, and an officer would be coming toward my direction, and he would tell me go into the room. And I'm like, okay. And he tells me to do the same thing, drop down to my boxers, and that's it. And so that happens quite often. And so looking back at it, I didn't really see it was a problem, because while in prison you go this mentality that you keep your mindset there, and you try not to think outside the prison system. So that's basically the institutionalization of someone. You have no choice but to become institutionalized. And so I had no one to turn to. I had caseworkers, I had the major, I had the warden, other female correctional officers, but I couldn't go to them because they're correctional officers, and I'm not supposed to talk to them. You have this whole new form of prison laws you have to learn through other inmates, and so I couldn't go to nobody. Even if I wanted to, there was no one there for me to go turn to and say, okay, this is happening to me. Correctional officers are telling me to undress and basically just show my boobs, and I couldn't do that. Nobody wanted to listen to me. Nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. Nobody cared about my safety. Like I say again, it wasn't the fear of other inmates. It was the fear of correctional officers. And I was glad to have gone out, but once I got out of prison, it was a huge transition for me. I did about 13 months in prison, and I did 13 months in county jail. So I did about almost 3 years being incarcerated. I also did some time in the Hull segregation for a month and a half, and that in itself just totally messed up my mind psychologically. So I'm still dealing with that slowly but truly. I am still Renae, and coming to today, I still get that police brutality. If it's not physical, it's always verbal. I'm being followed because some of the officers still know me. There's no way in disguising because obviously I'm like very tall. So I'm like 6 feet without heels. If you add heels to it, I'm like 6'5". So there's no hiding from me. So I utilize that. I utilize what I have, and I stand up for a lot of the trans people that have been killed, if not by police brutality, by people who are ignorant because they can't understand the idea of what transsexuality or transgenderism is. And so that is my story.
Let's give it up for Renae, courageous to share that story.
Thank you very much. I also graduated last semester in this fall, so that was a huge accomplishment for myself, despite that I should not be here. I should have been dead like 100 times over, and that's why I say a lot of things that I say, and because I've overcame a lot of things. I overcame people shooting at me, knife to my throat, threatened, beaten up, you name it, it's happened to me. And miraculously, for some reason, some really weird way, I was able to still be alive. And a lot of the other trans women of color specifically have experienced the same thing but never made it through, never came out alive. And so I'm here for a purpose, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Let's give it up. She got her degree. She graduated last semester and is now running our Gallup Center. So with that, we'll stand for questions, and thank you all for holding this space for us.
Okay, so I just want to introduce myself really quick. I'm John Stumpf. I am a Russian major here at UNM, and I'm working on my honors thesis on the LGBT community in Russia. So just a little info about myself. And again, thank you, Renae, for sharing that really moving story. And we really appreciate you coming in, and you as well, Alma. So just to start off, we were wondering about pronoun usage and how police and people using incorrect pronouns represents aggressions against gender non-conforming and transgender individuals. So if you guys could just speak about the importance of correct pronoun usage and how to, address asking someone for their preferred personal pronouns.
I think I kind of mentioned about how a lot of the officers would call me in the pronouns of he, him, and his, like, okay, Sean, you need to go over there. Why is he over there? Why is he dressed like that? Just using these male pronouns towards someone like myself, and I've always appeared like this, except for the hair color, which is new. But I wasn't so serious. Oh my goodness. But yeah, like pronouns geared toward me and male pronouns were very harsh toward me because it dehumanizes me. it makes me even much more invisible as I already am because I'm a transgender person, and we're a population where invisible, constantly pushed to the side and forgotten about. And so using proper pronoun is a vital thing because it validates me and it validates what I want, what I choose, and how I prefer to be announced. And so that's my take on that.
And I would say pronouns can be a form of microaggressions if they are being used in a derogatory way. It's also invalidating someone's identity. So it's always important to ask someone's pronoun. And I know in our trainings, if you've never asked someone their pronoun, it's a hard thing to do. So a lot of the times if you don't know, you can introduce yourself and share your pronoun and then ask somebody for theirs. So for example, it'd be like, hi Renae, how's it going? Good to meet you. My name's Alma Rosa. I use she pronouns. What pronouns do you use?
Hi Emma, my name is Renae and I use she, her, and hers pronouns as well.
Great, good to meet you, Renae. Let's go have lunch. So it can be very simple, but it's profound. And you're showing a level of respect that our community historically has not had. So using the right pronoun, and if you don't get that moment to ask that pronoun, then use someone's name, because that's the respectful way. And if you slip up and you really have to use a pronoun, I would recommend using they. They is currently our gender-neutral pronoun in our English language. It is something we already use. My friend and I are going to the store. They are getting me some ice cream, chocolate, and strawberries because we're gonna go back home and we're gonna watch movies, and they're bringing all of this great food. Now, do you know the gender of my friend? Does it matter? You know that I like ice cream, strawberries, and chocolate, right? That's what matters. So really, the gender is not the big deal. And it's really about being respectful. But as Renae shared in her experience, using the wrong pronoun or intentionally using a pronoun to misgender somebody or ultimately to out somebody can be dangerous and violent.
Thank you very much for that answer. So in preparation for this discussion, our class read an essay by Elijah Endelman in which the author used violence against trans women in DC to talk about queer necropolitics, which is how certain bodies, and in this case trans women of color, are coded as prostitutes and seen as invalid queers, and that their lives are not worthy of life and that their deaths mean nearly nothing. So could you help us understand how bodies of color and how specifically trans women of color are coded as prostitutes and what that means for police violence against trans women of color?
Is this the good and the bad?
So yeah.
Queer. Okay. Do you want to answer that?
Go ahead.
So I think, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. So I know that
We
was
got that on tape, right? Let's edit that part
was
out.
a super complicated question. So what I mean by queer necropolitics is that there's a good and a bad queer, and traditionally a good queer would be a white, cisgendered man who fits into like the heteronormative, heteromasculine understanding of queerness. And the bad queer would traditionally be trans women of color because they challenge all forms of patriarchal and white supremacy in that sense. So this article talked about how trans women's bodies are coded as inherently criminal. So they're always seen as the suspicious element in life. So they're easily marked as criminal and easily harassed, killed, etc. So I was wondering how you guys kind of, how you understand that in the context of New Mexico and what that was like here.
Sure. My take on that is criminals are not born, they're made. Our society makes them because we're thrown into prisons and now we're labeled felons or whatnot. And so besides that, in comparison to the article that was written, I'm basically labeled the bad queer person because I'm a woman of color. But going back to my experiences, sometimes you're forced to do things you have to do just to survive, and that's like becoming a sex worker. When in fact that jobs were unable to hire or don't want to hire me because I'm transgender. And so how do I support myself? How do I feed myself? How do I live? Where do I go when a society doesn't want me or wants to care for me? So how do I take care of myself? And so basically that bad queer isn't born, it's made by our society. And so it's just another label that continues to fall on a group of people that is already oppressed by so many labels as it is by the patriarchal society, basically. And so it's I can go further, but yeah.
Well, if you have more thoughts, feel free. So I think the good versus bad queer is a setup. For me, it's a tool of colonialism. It's a tool to have the oppressed oppress each other, right? So good versus bad, we have a concept in our community where we call each other family. So family, at times, our biological family rejects us. We get kicked out of our homes when we come out. We don't get hired. We don't get access to healthcare. There's many things that happen to us. So through that rejection, we find this unconditional love for each other, and we call each other family. Now, our relationships grow from that place, but there's this understanding that we all have faced a level of discrimination for being who we are and for trying to live our lives authentically. So I feel like when we're pitted against each other with good versus bad, we look at colonial structures, we look at racism, we look at heterosexual privilege, we look at the patriarchy, because all of these inform good versus bad, especially if good is white and bad is brown. That in itself is a problem. And when you see it like that, you can assess that that is a tool of colonialism. So as an oppressed and marginalized community, we don't have the luxury to be good versus bad. It's about the analysis of why we're being pitted against each other, because the colonizer then doesn't have to do the work, right? We do it for them. So to really shave down good versus bad and to break down what it means to objectify and eroticize a trans woman of color is really where we need to be going and having that conversation. Because it's not about prostitution, it's about survival, and it's called sex work, right? And it's a livelihood and it's economic development, because our structures that are there and are in place now reject our trans community. So it's another form of economic violence to not allow our trans community to get work. If you can't eat, if you can't pay your bills, if you don't have a place to lay your head, then what kind of life are you living? So as Renae says, she's not supposed to be here. Our trans and gender non-conforming community are not supposed to be here. So when our family does make it through and they make it out of prison and they graduate, we need to give them jobs. We need to do whatever we can to make sure that our trans and gender non-conforming community have the quality of life that we all deserve. And it's called basic human rights.
Quick example to what Alma had to say. After I graduated from the University of New Mexico here, I couldn't find a job just because I had a felony background, and everyone used that against me everywhere I applied for a position. And so, thankfully, Alma Rosa, she gave me a job, so I worked with Alma. But despite that, like even still to this day, all the applications that I've submitted for a job are getting back to me. Okay, we are unable to hire you based on your background. This happened 5 years ago. I've graduated college. What more do you need? I've not done a criminal act in any form since then. So how much more do I have to prove to society that I am a citizen of the United States? So how much more do I have to do? That is the question.
Well, I really appreciate you guys talking to me. You guys have actually answered like most of my questions in your presentation. So I'm going to turn this to the public, and we're going to open up for dialogue.
Because I have to do a little bit of a plug. Can you tell us, and this is a great opportunity because we have such a great group of folks here, can you tell us about some of the organizations that work around LGBTQ, but trans-specific as well, work, and maybe some of these folks will want to reach out to those organizations to help us do that work?
Absolutely. So the one organization that comes to mind, or the two organizations that come to mind, do I have anybody else in the audience I need to? I'm just kidding. So I would say that the work that Israel is talking about is really queer and trans liberation work. And that comes in many forms. And it also is in our organizations that are not organizations, that are community groups and that are not 501c3s. And I think some of that work also happens in the streets and organizing, and our queer and trans community being some of the organizers and direct action organizers of some of those movements. But some of our nonprofit organizations in the state are Equality New Mexico, and there is a satellite office in Las Cruces, and they are the #1 LGBTQ organization in the state that is doing policy advocacy. And we did have one success, as we all can imagine, trying to move anything through our state legislature at this current political time is very challenging, since I'm on UNM campus. But we did pass a memorial that was to, do you want to just talk about the memorial so I don't talk about it incorrectly?
So this year our big focus was safe schools, right, and creating safe schools to get student bullying in schools. We worked on a couple bills. The memorial that she's talking about is the Carlos B. Hill Memorial Bill. It created a fund, an unfunded fund, so it was a half a win, that will fund in the future programs that seek to eliminate bullying in our schools. We actually had a second win, the LGBT Health Disparities Task Force. It passed out of the Senate. We're actually working right now to get the Public Health Department to implement this task force without having it pass the House as a sort of good faith. They know it would have passed if we had the time. So we are working on policy issues around some of the things that we talked about.
And the memorial on conversion therapy passed as well, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, that one too.
That's,
We got 3 wins. We did all right. Look at that. I earned my keep this year. The last one was the conversion therapy bill, which did pass the Senate unanimously. We did have a couple senators walk on that. You can look that up if you'd like. And what the conversion therapy bill says is that our state Senate does not support practices that are unscientific, that go toward changing someone's gender, sexuality, or what have you. And it was supported by the American Psychological Association, scientists basically everywhere, because these practices are unscientific and should be against the law. So that's our next step, is actually making these practices against the law.
Thank you, Israel. And that's the good work of Equality New Mexico. And so as we do this great work, we can't forget about our young people, right? Because right now our youth, our queer and trans and gender nonconforming youth, are the ones leading the way. They are leading us in new forms of identity. They're leading us in the way of acceptance of each other, right? Like intergenerational learning, we have so much to learn from our young people. So that organization is the New Mexico GSA Network, and we have the coordinator for the GSA Network in the house. So I'd like to just ask Luz Marina if you want to say a few words about the GSA Network.
Hey everyone, my name is Luz Marina. Thank you for introducing me, Alma Rosa. Thank you. So, like Alma Rosa said, our youth are kind of leading the movement. We are definitely informed by them and led by them. So the network is a youth-informed, youth-led organization. I work with high schools around the state. We have around actually probably 70 GSAs in the state at the moment, all the way from Taos down to Las Cruces. And what we do is we work on anti-bullying work, and we also do it through an anti-oppression framework. So a lot of the stuff that Renae and Alma Rosa touched on are the ways that we approach the work that we do. We're talking about Christian dominance and breaking that down, right? We're talking about racism, classism, and how that's affecting a lot of our youth. So my population that we work with are 13 to 24, but more and more as time goes on. I'm starting to work in grade schools. So I know a couple of trans young girls who are 7 and 8 in Santa Fe, and so I want to make sure that I'm there for them. We're definitely getting some pushback from administration and figuring out how to handle that, but we're working as strongly as possible to make sure that they get the attention and need that they deserve. And I will also work with older adults, and we work closely with the UNM LGBTQ Resource Center to make sure that if our youth are going to go to school, a lot of our youth end up going to school at UNM, they have the resources that they need and one thing about their future. So, if any questions, I have my card on me, and we also run events and do a bunch of other things and fun. But that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Luz Marina. And they just did the All Colors Youth Summit last weekend, and they had about 20 youth, 30. Ooh, it's getting bigger. It was really awesome to have. There was one other thing. So it's the GSA network out of the Santa Fe Mountain Center. So feel free to reach out to Luz Marina.
One story that I think that doesn't get highlighted when we talk about specifically queer organizing within prisons. There's a really good zine that got published by a couple queer insurrectionist friends of mine. Torelli Press, you can look it up on Google. It's called the zine is called Queer Fire, the George Jackson Brigade, and I think that it represents a really good aspect, because we hear about Stonewall, which is so crucial, and we hear about the Screaming Queens, we hear about like these other things, but it's not so often that we actually hear about like queer and trans people organizing in the prisons in self-defense committees. And taking over whole blocks of prisons. The George Jackson Brigade was one of the only openly queer and trans-friendly revolutionary cells that went underground, like the Weather Underground and the Black Panthers. They were armed. They did several bombings in the Northeast against imperialism and against U.S. capitalism. And their membership went to prison. And for many of them, this is the first time, many of them as trans and queer people, that they were in prison, and they got to experience being raped, or they had to experience sexual violence, or watching other people experience sexual violence. And so they started organizing block by block, cell by cell, and they eventually took over a space within the prison, and they used that as an organizing base, where they provided safe haven within the prison for queer and trans people. So I would just throw that out there as another example of powerful queer and trans organizing. It's called the George Jackson Brigade. The zine is called Queer Fire.
So the George Jackson Brigade and the zine is called Queer Fire. Awesome name. Any other questions? Reflections? We'll take those two. Changing pages. So super quick on Two-Spirit, and this will be a little bit just of an elevator overview in a sense. So we live in a state that has 55 pueblos? 21 pueblos, and one of the largest in the Navajo Nation, right? So across the nation, some Native Indigenous people use the term Two-Spirit. Navajo Nation, our Dene community, does not. They use third and fourth gender, which is Natle and Dilpa. So we're really trying to honor the indigenous name for third and fourth gender. But if someone does use Two-Spirit to identify themselves, then I would respect that and honor that for them. But it is a Native Indigenous identity, so if you were not of that culture, that is not your term. Two-Spirit allows, or Two-Spirit culture, or within traditional culture, allows someone to be fluid between gender roles. So it's not about sexual orientation, although sexual orientation is mixed in with that, but that's not the traditional definition of being Two-Spirit. So that's just a quick overview, and it's much deeper, right? And we're trying to, when we're in a place of reintroducing ourselves as Native Indigenous people, and we are doing current research to find the names, indigenous names of our people. And Two-Spirit is a Western term, and it was also coined in 1989. Any other questions? Well, I want to say before we break, there is some serious history in her story in this room. And a lot of the times in our movements, we see our queer and trans community at the forefront of organizing. But we don't honor our community as queer or trans. So I just want to say that when you all go back out into the streets, you go back out to organizing, and if you do see that your family or queer and trans people are organizing, make sure you're honoring our people. And if you all are going to be risking arrest, please be conscious of our trans and gender nonconforming community and our queer community, because when they get put in the prison industrial complex, it's a whole different experience in comparison to people that are cisgender. So we heard Renae's story today, but I would ask that you are protective of the LGBTQ community when they are frontliners, when they're organizing, and if you all risk arrest.
Thank you, Alma and Renae, for coming in today. Let's give them a round of applause. And on that note, you guys are good to go. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
That was great. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, that was really wonderful. Yeah, that was a pretty courageous thing to do. Of course. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for the flowers and chocolate.
I really appreciate it.
Thank Darcy for that. Darcy was all over that. Thanks for bringing people too to do the resource stuff. That's good.
Yes.
You gotta go. I'm gonna take off. Sweet. Thank you.
I never did. I had this like from aggravated battery with a deadly weapon.